Yo, what's going on, everybody? What's up with a brand new video for you guys today, and welcome to the channel. Today we got a reaction video for you guys. Today we're going to react to a video titled "Why the US Sucks at Football." So let's watch this. You know, it's been waiting in my watch later list for a while. I feel like it's a few months old video now, but I figure since now we're getting a little bit more traction on the sport channel, we should watch it, check it out, and talk about it. I will say this though, start things off: the US doesn't suck at football. Clearly, because the women's team is pretty much the best national team when it comes to the women's leagues. No women's international team has more World Cups than USA. They dominate the Olympics as well. Even though Japan has got one against them, and Canada also won. I think it was the last Olympics. I think Canada won. but generally, the U.S. women's team is they've been the best international women's team for decades. Some would say that now other teams are catching up to them, but again, for decades it's been them. It's the U.S. men's team who are the struggle. The U.S. men's team, and I feel like when it comes to U.S. men's team, I think why they suffer is because the talent pool for American sports is a lot more wider than other sports, and yet other countries, or other countries, they have multiple sports too, but the king in most of these countries is football, whereas America, that's not the case. In America, if you're an athlete, you first start trying to play football, American football, that is, NFL, college, and if you're not good at that, you try basketball, and if you're not good at that, you try baseball. If you're not good at that, you try to become a professional wrestler, get into WWE. If you're not good at that, you become a hockey player. So you see what I'm saying here? Like there's a bigger pool for where someone who's talented will go to. In comparison to like the women's games, a lot of them, they either become a gymnastic or you go to WNBA. But for the most part, the biggest draw for a woman who's into sports would be football. So it's easier for that talent pool to be what it is for the U.S. women's national team versus the men's, because the men aren't really having, America's best talent trying out for football. So what I would also say is a big reason why football, aka soccer, tends to like not be able to draw in people's attention to play the sport is money. It's very, very expensive to play soccer in America. Very expensive. A lot of countries don't know this, because a lot of countries it's not expensive. If you're a good footballer in South America, once you get discovered, you got to go and take it. In America, it's expensive to get the gear, expensive to get to camps, especially considering the fact that America doesn't have academies. If you're a good young baller, La Masia, is a potential for you. United's academy is a potential for you. Madrid academy is a potential for you. When you're an American, though, you don't really have that luxury to go to an academy that's just based around, soccer, So you have to like play summer leagues. You got to get to like camps and stuff like that, and it's very, very expensive. On the flip side, much like how, like I said, in South America, you don't have to be wealthy to play football. In America, you don't have to be wealthy to play American football. You don't have to be able to play basketball. Basketball and football is easy to get into, because everything that you need to do is just going to be at school. So if you're in elementary school, you might do some summer leagues, but it's cheap. You just need some gym shoes and you're good. But like outside of that, in middle school, you play for middle school basketball team. You play for middle school football team. In high school, you play for the high school team. If you're good enough, you can go to college. You can play for the college team. So the avenue for Americans with basketball and with American football is way more open than soccer is. Soccer, it's not the same way. Are there high school teams? Sure, but again, the equipment is more expensive, and for the most part, you gonna want to be somebody who's been playing soccer for a long time when you're trying to play for like a high school team or a college team, which means if you were like a kid, again, like I said before, get into like summer leagues. But anyways, let's get this video started and react to it.
The United States and football don't mix. then what are we doing? What's the point?
Hey, I hate soccer.
You do?
Yeah.
I can't stand soccer. I think that it's the least talented sport on earth.
It doesn't care and does not understand the football culture shared by so much of the rest of the world. And if you've ever wanted to know why, then this video is the one to watch. Because by the end, you will understand football in America and how it has finally started to change. An important part of that fact, though, is that I'm not English. I'm American, actually. I grew up in American football culture, or soccer as we call it. Through years of traveling around the world to make
I'll also say this when it comes to American soccer, for those who are interested. Even though on the face value, on the surface, it looks like Americans hate soccer, American soccer fans are insanely devoted. Like, just how you see when it comes to like a Man United fan, or think about Everton fans, Spurs fans, Barcelona fans, Monaco fans, like passion fan bases. I'm not talking about the fan bases where, you know, they became fans in the last decade, like City fans and PSG fans. We're talking about like real passion fan bases. American soccer fans are that passionate about their teams. It's just, you know, on a smaller scale because of how much smaller the sport is when it comes to America. Like, for example, Detroit City FC has a amazing fan base. Detroit City FC plays in the USFL, which is, you know, a smaller. It's like the division below the MLS. There's not like actual divisions in American soccer like how there is with, you know, Premier League and Championship. But it's kind of like that. It's like you have MLS, and you have like that tier below, and that's what a USFL is. As well, if you look at the NWSL, which, you know, is the professional women's league in America. Those fan bases are insanely passionate and love the sport. Americans who love soccer, but it is kind of like a meme, and, you know, the pop culture thing is for Americans to hate it. But when you actually watch like American, you know, games, even when it comes to like the men's national team, there's a lot of passion with the Outlaws. The Outlaws is basically what we call our ultras, if you will. You know, they're very, very, very passionate. And I also think about when it comes to like why Americans are, you know, a little worse when it comes to the talent pool is coaching. The U.S. Federation sucks at hiring good coaches, and because of that, the American players don't really grow. They don't have the best training regimen. They don't have the best teachers to like coach them into being better players, which is why you will see certain players shine over in, you know, England or elsewhere in Europe, but others won't because the others are playing in MLS. One of the best pieces of advice that I think Jurgen Klinsmann gave the players was go play in Europe. And the players who you see thrive on the national team are the ones who play in Europe. Christian Pulisic. You look at Robinson. You look at you know, Way, and you look at McKennie, and to some extent, you also look at Gio Reyna. Reyna is one of those players too. I know he hasn't had like the best time on his loan, but he's viewed as a very good player for the team. But again, he plays in Europe. New expected video.
Videos, I have a unique perspective on how the football culture works inside the United States and how it contrasts to the one outside. You see, the American sporting infrastructure is constructed differently than basically any other country in the world. Those leagues we spend all the time watching are made up of franchises in closed league systems, and they operate as businesses. The vast majority of those franchises did not start as local sporting clubs or small
That's also true.
entities that eventually naturally
I know we're pausing a lot, but that's what a reaction video is. You don't want to just have someone's video play out entirely. When I mentioned that there's, you know, multiple sports in America, it's also important to remember that they're not tied to each other. If you play basketball in Barcelona, you play for the same Barcelona that the football team is tied to. Same thing when it comes to like any other sport in Spain. You play for Real Madrid, you play for the exact same sports tied to, you play for the exact same franchise as tied to each other. Whereas, again, I'm from Detroit, so use my hometown, for example. If you play for the Detroit Tigers, you're not in the same organization as the Detroit Lions. And even though the Tigers are owned by the exact same ownership group as the Red Wings, they're not the same team. They're not the same structure. You know, Barcelona's Barcelona, but the Red Wings are the Red Wings. They're not you don't call the Detroit Tigers, Red Wings, Pistons, and Lions all one team name. They're not just called Detroit and, you know, whatever kind of logo you want to go with it. So they're all kind of separate entities of businesses, and that's what American sports is too. And that kind of also makes it harder for a sport to thrive, because you're not attached to a major business. Again, using the USFL for example, a lot of those USFL teams aren't attached to a major business. For Detroit City FC, they're not attached to like, let's say Dan Gilbert, who is the owner of the Cleveland Cavaliers. He's not attached to Chris Ilitch, who owns the Tigers and the Red Wings. He's the CEO of Little Caesars. His dad started Little Caesars. So you don't have that connectivity that you have in Europe when it comes to sport franchises.
Expanded into large sporting brands like Arsenal, for example. It was founded by the workers at the Royal Arsenal complex and eventually, through a long winding tale of events, became a massive sports club. And the lack of that structure in the United States means there's a lack of traditional ties to the community that would be familiar to people that grew up in a football culture. Now, that doesn't mean that the franchises don't have deep roots in their community. I grew up in Tampa, and I am a huge Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Tampa Bay Lightning, and Tampa Bay Rays fan. What I'm talking about here is something like an academy. There's no academy for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers to eventually develop some local lads to go on and one day play for their favorite NFL team. This is a result of the way sports developed in the United States. Now, it did develop at the same time as England or France, for example, but it came up around a different social pillar. While football clubs in those countries were found around different factories or town identities in the United States, sports congregated around something that was already all over the place: the local universities and colleges that blanketed the country. Leagues like the NFL or the NBA were actually formed well after college sports was already a huge attraction in America, so they were built on top of the existing infrastructure. That's where the draft comes from, this concept of university players that can no longer play at their university being then drafted in.
So like in this context, you can look at a college as the academy for American pro sports. And, to the degree that would be the case, but it's not a guarantee. You're not guaranteed to be tied to a team just because you went to college. Like, sure, you're also not guaranteed to play for Barcelona if you're at La Masia, but you're still tied to the team to some extent. The team is still your team essentially. But like if you go to college at University of South Carolina, you're not guaranteed to be a Panther. Like, that's not how it works. So again, the connectivity just isn't there
into the professional leagues, and it is completely foreign to people that are used to having academies developing their players instead. But it's because those university teams already existed and were hugely popular before the professional leagues ever did. There was one sport that was so old in the United States that it dodged this. That was baseball, which was founded all the way back in the 1840s and developed a local club system similar to football clubs around the world. And as a result, each professional baseball team has a large minor league system that
That's exactly what I was about to say. I was about to say baseball, in a way, does have what you can consider to be an academy. In baseball, when you get drafted, you get assigned to a 3-tier division essentially. Let's go with that. You have single A, you have double A, you have triple A, and then at the triple A, you have the majors. So let's say you are a 17-year-old high school kid who just got drafted. You can go to college if you want to, but if the team says, hey, we're just going to sign you straight to single A, you're now a semi-professional baseball player, you play single A. And if you do good, you might get promoted to double A. And if you're good there too, you get promoted to triple A. And if you're outstanding there, not good, outstanding in triple A, then you get promoted to Major League Baseball. So baseball does have that tiered structure that you would kind of compare to an academy
that it uses to develop players, which looks a lot more similar to an academy than any other American sport. By 1870, universities were already competing against each other in what would become American football, and soccer was not adopted by universities as a sport at the top level until 1959 with the modern rules. Dave Litterer, who maintains the USA Soccer History Archive, said that colleges were playing a hybrid, neither fully soccer nor rugby, but it's only a guess. I don't know, and neither I think does anybody else. Perhaps that is a rather unsatisfying answer in this day and age, but history history is not an exact science. Now, he's talking about way back in 1870 when American football and soccer looked a lot more similar than they do now. The truth is, none of those early games played by American universities look like American football, rugby, or soccer the way that those three different sports look today. But eventually the rules of the sport that was played by these university and colleges all over the place were codified and progressed in the direction that would become American football. But what did give the United States continued exposure to the developing rules of soccer was immigration. 25 million Europeans came over to the United States from 1830 to 1930, including 8 million people from the British Isles. As a result, particularly in immigrant communities, the modern rules of soccer were played in a lot of local leagues and clubs. And it was actually out of this crop of players that the United States selected its first World Cup roster for the 1930 World Cup, the first one ever. This team, quite amazingly, managed to reach the World Cup semi-final by beating Belgium and Paraguay before getting smacked by Argentina 6-1, who would go on to lose to eventual champions Uruguay. The tiebreaker from the group stage actually gave the United States a third-place finish, which is still the best finish by any team ever from outside of Europe or South America. And the striker on that team, Bert Patenaude from Fall River, Massachusetts, actually made history. He scored the first ever World Cup hat trick against Paraguay. When the players returned back to the United States, there was no cohesive place for them to play. The size of the United States prevented a national league from developing, and the university preference for American football meant that these players could only practice at local clubs.
So he said size, and I want to like hone in on him saying the word size, because if you think about how each nation is built up in terms of the continents, Europe is like an amalgamation of multiple countries, right? You can take a train and a short train or even a bus from one country to another country, and it won't be like a long travel depending on where you are. Whereas in America, you know, going from South Carolina to, you know, Washington State is a bigger travel than some countries in Europe getting in between each other. So like in America is just a massive place. Like America is a continent that, you know, you can look at each state in America as if they're their own countries, and to an extent, that's how each state has their identities. Almost every, if not every, U.S. state has their own identity as if they were individual countries. So like, you know, it's 50 states. You look at this 50 countries, but like, you know, it's just one country. So yeah, I just want to like hone in on size, because I do think that matters a lot.
Clubs and various leagues that would pop up and then go away as soon as they seemed to appear. And as a result, after a triumphant performance at the 1930 World Cup, the United States would only play in 4 more World Cup matches until 1990. As other footballing cultures around the world were developing league systems and professionalizing their players to train at a higher level, the United States strategy of just slapping together a team of immigrant or second-generation players from local leagues to go play the World Cup just wasn't working nearly as well. There was also this underlying factor, this driving motivation to assimilate into U.S. culture. The rules for association football were viewed as foreign. After all, the United States had its own rules, and it had its own sports. The United States is almost entirely an immigrant nation. Even in the annals of my own personal family history, there are stories of great-grandparents that didn't teach their kids their native language from where they came from because of fear of those kids being ostracized. They wanted them to be able to completely assimilate into society, and speaking another language wouldn't help them do that, which is ironic because now it would be really helpful, but here I am trying to use Rosetta Stone to be able to get back where we started. And with all those cultural and infrastructural factors working against it and no cohesive plan to try and save association football, it just became something that nobody cared about. It is worth mentioning, though, that the United States did beat England at the 1950 World Cup in England's first ever World Cup appearance in Brazil. It's considered one of the greatest upsets in World Cup history, with the U.S. coach saying before the game that his team were sheep ready to be slaughtered, which is not a motivation tactic I'm familiar with. While England's team was obviously full of professional players, everybody on the U.S. team had jobs on the side and was still playing at those small clubs and local leagues. It is absolutely hilarious how unorganized it was compared to today. I mean, the U.S. captain was picked specifically for that game. It was some dude named Ed McIlvaney, who had been born in Scotland, and the reason they gave for picking him as the captain in that match was, well, he was British. The guy actually went on to play for Manchester United, by the way. They called him the Yank from the tail of the bank. And maybe, just maybe, with the idea of the internet internet and instant communication, this sort of miracle story would have spurned an interest in association football in the United States, the plucky underdogs upsetting favorites England. But none of that existed. In fact, only one American reporter was in Brazil at all, and it's because he decided that he should cover it on his own. He paid for his own trip to Brazil to cover the tournament. It was clear that the United States had settled into association football as a second-tier sport. And for 40 years, it stayed that way. The US existed entirely outside of the footballing world. It played Super Bowls while the rest of the world was playing World Cups. But there was actually one very surprising silver lining that saved football in the United States, and that was university sports, actually. And first, this was actually on the women's side of the game, thanks to a law colloquially called Title IX. This was a law regarding scholarships for American university and college sports teams. Scholarships being a free ticket to go to school, which can be quite expensive in the United States, in exchange for being a very good athlete playing on one of the sports teams. Well, Title IX said that each college and university had to give out the same number of men's and women's scholarships for sports every year, and it was enacted all the way back in 1972. The problem for schools immediately was all the scholarships given out on the American football teams, because that's a sport that's only been played by men at the university level. So there was no women's team full of scholarship American football players to balance it out. This led a ton of universities and colleges to jump into creating women's soccer teams, because the teams were pretty large and the facilities were relatively cheap, so you could get a lot of scholarships to help balance out
Dinah Cassianos?
because the
Let's go back a little bit.
pretty large and the facilities were
It's Dinah Cassianos. That's God, I forgot her name. I didn't know Dinah Cassianos played for freaking FSU.
relatively cheap, so you can get a lot of scholarships to help balance out your scholarship inequity. The result was a very large apparatus of identifying and developing talented women's soccer players before really any other country in the world. And by the time the first Women's World Cup was created in 1991, the United States had created a machine, despite being a non-factor on the men's side that had just qualified for its first World Cup in 50 years. The United States women won the entire tournament. By 1999, the women's national team had become superstars because the United States was good at it. They won the World Cup in a sold-out Rose Bowl in
Iconic
California.
photo.
Over 1.1 million people attended that 1999 Women's World Cup. The United States was clearly ready to embrace soccer for the first time as long as the team was winning. After all, the United States is a sucker for a spectacle, and it was
That last bit before the actual last bit is what I think matters a huge amount. America cares about soccer when America is winning. Wondering why the men's team doesn't get a lot of attention? They don't win. It's hard. Americans are very fair weather. Like, as an American who experiences American sports, and I see it bandwagon in American sports is a common thing. Like, Americans will hop from team to team to team. You might have a friend who's American, and 2 years ago he was a Warriors fan. This year he's a fan of the Knicks because they got Jalen Brunson, or they're a fan of the the Spurs because they got Wemby. So like they change up based on what popularity is going. Sometimes winning, like the Spurs suck right now at least, but that's not a team to cheer for winning. But like my point being is you will use the NFL for example. I don't watch a lot of basketball, so I don't know who's good right now in basketball. But in American football, you might have someone who was a Lions fan 5 years ago, but now they're a Chiefs fan, or they might have been a Patriots fan, 3 years ago, but now they're a Buccaneers fan, or now they're a fan of, the Packers because they started winning again, so that's what Americans do. Like, imagine if you're a football fan over in Europe, imagine a team exists that was never really a good team, but then randomly they got good and started winning a lot. And at first you never heard their fan base ever, but now they're all popping up like, oh, I'm a Manchester City fan. I'm a Manchester City fan. I'm a City fan. I'm a City fan. It's like, where all these City fans come from? You start hearing like, I'm a PSG fan. Where all these PSG fans coming from? That's what American sports is for almost every sport. Is people they will change who they're a fan of based on who has success and who's winning games. So it matters. So when it comes to the men's national team, sorry, it's cold. Since they don't win anything, Americans don't care. They're like, we're not going to watch these people who don't win. We don't watch these losers. Want to know what Americans care about the men's team? When they play Mexico. Want to know why? Because we beat Mexico. But like, we have confidence that the men's team will beat Mexico. So we're like, hey, 2-0, you know, 2-0.
It's through star power that the men's side of things got its first jolt, its first false start, when Pele signed for the New York Cosmos in 1975, and him and a couple of other famous footballers from days gone by were selling out American football stadiums because people wanted to watch them play. The star-studded NASL was the United States' first serious attempt at a top-level outdoor professional league.
I know we're pausing again early here, but when did the LA Galaxy stop being a trash team? When it got David Beckham. When a European star comes to America, that team becomes massively relevant to Americans, because again, Americans follow trends, Americans follow popularity. Pele, known as the greatest of all time by most people, like if you are a soccer fan, you might say your GOAT is Messi or Ronaldo. Messi or Ronaldo might say Pele. Like, he's your favorite soccer player's favorite soccer player. That guy played in America. Americans were like, we gotta see that guy. It's like LeBron James went to go play basketball for Real Madrid. A lot of people in Madrid were like, oh, we're going to all of those Madrid basketball games. They got LeBron James. It's like if Michael Jordan went to play for like Barcelona's basketball teams. Like, oh shit, we watching all of those games. And you see it again recently when Messi went into Miami. Now everyone is an Miami fan. That team didn't have a huge fan base. Now it does.
Once the star power departed, the NASL quickly folded back into nothingness. All the while, the grassroots development of American men's players was not kicking on at all. In fact, because of the American football scholarship disparity in Title IX, there are a lot less men's university teams than there are women's university teams. By the time the NASL failed, the American FA knew that it had to do something else, so it launched a wild bid for the 1986 World Cup. And while that bid failed, the United States eventually won the bid for the 1994 Men's World Cup, despite having never qualified for a World Cup past 1950. And it was at that moment, once again, surprisingly, that university sports came to the aid of American football. Well, not American football, but like American Association football. I was bound to mess that up eventually. After all, after the NASL
I had someone on my Twitch stream ask me, when do I pick and choose to say the word soccer and football? I told him in my Twitch chat, when I'm playing a soccer game, I'm playing for like FIFA or FC. When we're talking about football, I say football. If I'm playing like Madden and I'm talking to my American friends, I say soccer. I change up which word I use based on context of like who the audience is. If you're watching this video, even though this is a sports channel for all sports, most of my content has been about football. So I say football, and when I'm referring to American football, I just say American football. But if this was mostly an American football channel, I would say football and soccer.
There was no professional outdoor
It
league. The high amateur level of university soccer on the men's side, as limited as it might be, was the highest level you could play outdoors in the country. The U.S. coach Bob Gansler picked a team of players fresh out of college to try and make it to the 1990 World Cup in preparation for 94, and those players were given small contracts by the American FA so they could train professionally in preparation. Gansler said of his team, many of them were second-generation immigrants. Their parents and family lives different from an apple pie American ideal. They loved a sport that many around them reviled. That last bit we will come back to later, don't worry. But the qualification for 1990 was huge because there were rumors that if the United States couldn't make a decent showing at the 1990 World Cup, that the 94 World Cup might actually be pulled. And it all came down to a final qualifying match at, get this, Trinidad and Tobago, which hadn't lost at home in 2 years at that point. The national stadium in Port of Spain was packed, and the United States managed to deliver what was perhaps its most important win ever on the men's side. A stunning strike from Paul Caligiuri gave the Americans a 1-0 win.
Putting it in to Caligiuri. Beats the first man. A left-footed shot. Paul Caligiuri has scored a goal.
War goal.
Lead 1-0.
The United States arrived at the 1990 World Cup, its first in 50 years, with a thud, a 5-1 loss against Czechoslovakia. And the next match was against the hosts, Italy, and that match was projected to get wildly out of hand. I mean, why wouldn't it? The United States was essentially a college all-star team with 1 or 2 professionals thrown in for spice and flair against a team that had Baresi, Maldini, Baggio. But in a gutsy performance, the United States only lost 1-0. It was a result so surprising that the host nation fans actually booed their star-studded team off the field. It was also a performance that opened doors for Americans in European leagues in a serious way for the first time, with 10 players from that team in 1990 going on to sign contracts to play professionally in Europe. That included John Harkes, the first ever American to play in the Premier League, and recognizable names like Casey Keller. This produced a much more competitive team at the 1994 World Cup for the United States, where it pulled off a shocking upset of Colombia to actually make it to the knockout stages in its home World Cup. And that home World Cup coincided with the founding of MLS, which was the first sustainable professional outdoor league in the United States in 1994. Although that wasn't clear immediately because MLS was a bit fledgling in its early years, but was able to build itself up by convincing owners to buy into the league instead of individual teams. But it also was designed to appeal to an American public that was used to franchises in closed leagues. I made an entire video about MLS. I'll link you to it at the end of this video, but the point is eventually it developed into a very profitable league structure that could also produce and develop professional players in a way the United States has never been able to do before. But it's still not developing players the same way a club in a normal footballing culture would because of university sports. University men's soccer went from a help to get the national team off the ground to a hindrance, often forcing young players to choose between multi-year commitments to play at a university or just going pro out of high school at 17 or 18 years of age. Not to mention the serious issues caused by a lack of football academies in the United States because MLS, which is a closed system, is only going to have 30 teams in it, which means everybody else has to pay for play in the youth systems that they want to participate in. For example, the travel team I grew up playing in ended at U18 because after that everybody just got a job or went to college. There was no senior club attached to it that was playing in like the 4th tier of anything. That doesn't exist. But there was and still is a more significant cultural inertia for football to overcome in America. And this brings me back to that comment that the US coach made when he was building his 1990 squad, talking about how the sport was reviled. Now, there are no facts here, no quantifiable way to discuss this, but the coach captured a long-held distaste that many Americans felt for soccer when he used the word reviled. Because of how sports and society developed in the United States, as we just talked about, soccer was a foreign sport. It was played by the other. It was un-American. And so the more American you became as an immigrant, the less you played it. And as a result, it became excluded from the American national ideal. When playing American football, for example, and let's say you weren't playing tough enough to the coach's liking, it wouldn't be out of place to hear the coach say something like, "Come on, this isn't soccer, stop flopping around." In the United States, we like to think of ourselves as very tough. And American football in particular embodies this. It's a brutally tough sport, and soccer was soft by comparison. This is hard to explain as an American, but we essentially have an inferiority and superiority complex at the same time. We lack the historical precedent and cultural development of many other countries around the world. We know we are rougher around the edges, and as a result, we treat the perceived refinement of these other cultures as a weakness. And that weakness was reflected in the less physical sport that they all played, soccer. And soccer is still now reviled by a portion of the American population for, lack of a better word, not being a manly enough sport. But that perception is changing through my generation and the generation before me. First, it was Dempsey and Donovan, then the generation of Pulisic, Adams, and McKinney. We grew up watching the Premier League on TV on Saturday mornings, playing FIFA online with our friends, and learning about the world of football through a screen. And we want that here. Or in the case of our new generation of players, we want to be part of it. A deep cultural understanding of the rules doesn't exist yet, but recognition of the sport has increased infinitely from that hard-scrabble group of trailblazers back in 1990. To watch the World Cup knockout match against the Netherlands in 2022, I had to wait outside a bar for 2 hours at 6 a.m. just to get inside and watch the game. The 2015 Women's World Cup final was watched by 27 million.
This has nothing to do with the video, but I just want to like, I said this before, and I don't know which video it was, but I said my favorite player of all time is Messi. My second favorite player of all time is right here, Christian Press. The United jersey that y'all have seen in videos is her jersey. She went to her and her partner Tobin Heath went to play for Manchester United, and that year their jerseys sold more than a men's jerseys that year when it came to United. So Christian Press, one of my second favorite player of all time, right there. Great team, by the way. This team was freaking stacked. You had Becky Sauerbrunn right here, who still plays. Abby Wambach retired. Julie Ertz retired. Sydney Leroux over here in the corner. I've always Sydney. I think she has dual citizenship. I think she can also play for the Canadian team too. Carly Lloyd over here. Alex Morgan up here. Hope Solo in the back. Megan Rapinoe. Ali Krieger just retired. Pino also just retired. So I'm kind of just pointing out who's all retired now. Becky, I think she's retired from the national team, but hasn't retired from like actual NWSL play. Yes, so retired, injured, and on the way back, retired, ran for president for the U.S. Federation, retired, still plays for Angel City.
Americans. That's 10 million more Americans than English people that watched the English women's team win the European Championship in 2022. In a Washington Post poll after the 2022 World Cup, 8% of Americans said that soccer was their favorite sport, just a few percentage points behind
favorite sport is soccer
and basketball. And among Americans under 30,
second is hockey.
Passed baseball in that same poll. So yes, we sucked for a long time, but the reasons why are changing. And even though football in the United States will always look
Alexi Lawless, get him out of here.
Formed, American football, American Association football, will never be lost in the darkness again. Thank you to Isaiah.
I'll tell you this right now, though. Just want to go back a little bit.
Will never be lost.
Even though we meme about the MLS has created iconic American stars in terms of like in other countries you might not think a lot about them, but in America, when it comes to the American soccer community, we're very, very big on them. Carlos Vela. We are very, very like ignoring the rivalry between Mexico and the US. American soccer fans are very, very high on Carlos Vela. Like, you know how FC FIFA has like icons and heroes. If they ever gave the MLS any like icon players or hero players, they do have some from like Dempsey and Donovan and Beasley, but he still plays. So like, let's say FC 26 or FIFA 26, he should be a hero for the MLS. He should be in that same breath as Donovan and Dempsey when it comes to the MLS, because Carlos Vela has been he's I don't want to say iconic, but he's been one of the most popular and one of the biggest players in the MLS.
Lost in the darkness again. Thank you to Isaiah, our research partner in this piece. And if you want to read or watch any of the sources we used for this entire video, they're all down in the description. If you want to watch that MLS video I was talking about, it's a beginner's guide to MLS. It's right there. And if you enjoyed this video, then please do subscribe. Then you can head over there, keep binge watching, blow off the rest of your day. Who needs a to-do list? There's videos to.
All right. Good video. Really kind of a month ago. Leave a like. I'll have this video whenever I do reactions. I'll always put the link to the video as the first link in my description box. So the first link in the description box will be this video. It's a good video. American soccer is definitely growing. Each year the numbers are looking better and better for American soccer. The USFL is growing as well, and the USFL actually has the USL. I don't know why I kept saying USFL, but the USL, this one right here, the USL. Is actually trying to like get divisions and whatnot. So like the USL is trying to have, so I'm pretty sure people will watch this video who are like, it's not called the USFL, it's called the USL. Look, my brain's my brain. Apologies that I had the F in there. The American League's been confusing because there are sports that's been called USFL, so I just kind of like, you know. But anyways, the USL is growing rapidly, and they have plans to have divisions like European soccer does. And the sport itself is growing. You know, there's teams like the KC Current who have their own stadium. Like that's an unheard of thing in America for a women's team to have their own stadium. Most women teams are playing in like shared stadiums, be it like a team they're sharing with a college team or sharing with a semi-pro team. They're usually sharing a stadium. But the KC Current actually has their own stadium. And a lot of the NWSL games are selling out. The NWSL is pretty much the forefront for, you know, football's growth in America. And when it comes to the resentment Americans have towards it, like I said, I just feel like it's yes, it's old people who are just being old people, but again, it's also just success. If the men's team was successful, it will be more, they will be bigger here. You know, like if you look at when European teams play in America, they sell out. When Barcelona played at the Big House, which is Michigan Stadium, 116,000 people filled up that stadium. When Man United played the exact same stadium, 116,000 people filled up that stadium. Like it's insane. Americans do want to watch football, especially when it comes to like the big teams, because there's a lot of Americans who are Real fans, a lot of Americans who are United fans, a lot of Americans who are Barcelona fans. Like Americans want to watch football. It's just, you know, the MLS doesn't have like a lot of options. MLS isn't as entertaining and doesn't have the star power. You know, even when it comes to the American stars like Pulisic, he doesn't play in America. He plays for AC Milan, an iconic franchise. You know, so it's like there are no stars of the MLS other than, like, you know, again, as before, Dempsey, Carlos Vela, etc. So as if this video, again, check out the original video, link in the description box below. I'll be your boy, Mr. Archer. I'll see you when I see you guys. Y'all stay safe, count another. See you when I see you. I'm out here. Deuces.